Is that on? We were at home.
Okay.
Bring our dogs.
All right. It is 5 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. My name is Huang Tran. For the record, I will be temporary chair of this committee for today. We have Council President Honda today as a voting member, so that's for the record. Council Member Moore is excused, and we have quite a number of council members here, so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves instead of me introduce them. So why don't we start with Lydia?
Hi, I'm Councilmember Lydia Safa-Dawson.
I'm newly elected council member Jack Walsh.
And,
Welcome, Jack.
and Linda Kochmar.
All right. Okay, we have a few items here. We will try to move them as quickly as we can. I just came back from a 10-hour flight, so if I am not out there, you know why. Okay, so the first item is public comments, and we do have one yellow sheet here. Helen Kubik? Go ahead, please. Did I say your name right? Thank you.
Council President Honda, did she need to have, she asked if she could speak without her mask at the podium.
It's a public meeting. We're supposed to have masks on in public.
Okay. Actually, I asked if they could, so for the next one, social distance enough that we could not. Anyway, it's easier to understand people
Yeah.
without the mask. Anyway, so I
Thank
have
you,
some
though.
notes. And this is about the licensing requirements. Now, is it just for the supportive housing, just the hotels? Because it seemed to be exclude the ones out in the residential areas, so I have a question about that. I do like the part where that said shall not use drugs at all, because it used to say on the premises. So I think we should make it at all. I know there was some discussion about the Fair Housing Act and how we can't discriminate against certain people, but the Fair Housing Act does not say anything about having to allow people to conduct illegal activities. And if you look in the Fair Housing Act, it's federal, and federal law says it's illegal to use heroin. So there's what I have. So I like that fact that we're shall not use drugs at all. One question I have, it says, and none of these places can take anybody without referrals. Referral from who? Who's going to be referring these people to these places? That's a good question. I would like it to be under the control of Federal Way. That somebody that looking out for the best interests of Federal Way is the one who's filling up all these places. Not just, this still question referral from who. Now, they did just open up a place up in North Seattle, and Dow Constantine had this big speech, and they were saying how they got 15 of the people from the local areas, and he was asked by the reporter, why only so few from the local area? He spouted off something about it was a state law was that way, which I don't believe is true. He also said, and I don't know how true this is, that he was willing to work with the cities to work with their preferred providers. Do we have that? Or are we just going to let anybody come in here? There's choices that we need to make. Also, the thing about the 15, only 15 from here, I don't think we need to be importing people from elsewhere. Number one, if they do get kicked out, where are they going to go? They're going to go in their woods? Are they going to go back to where they came from? Number two, they were discussing there is people with behavioral mental health issues. Oh, am I done? Okay, so anyway, the way the law stands now, the police cannot detain any of these people. because they say, well, they're not qualified. Well, you know what? Neither is that little 19-year-old girl who just got her first job at the mall. She's not qualified to deal with them. And we can't have, more people with behavioral issues, mental health, running around our stores and all that. So anyway,
Thank you.
I think I'm done. I don't know.
Do
That's
we
all I have to say.
Do we have any other
Looks like
public
we have
comments?
another one.
Ah,
That's Ann.
next speaker is Ann. You go ahead.
Hi, I'm Ann Blevins, and I just want you to know that I should be counted as in favor of having that building turned into condos. People that own each section, so that they take care of it, and no drugs or any of that stuff, okay? This is very important to the large section of condos that is across the street from that, and also the cord. I mean, anyway, the people across, the businesses across the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Our next speaker is Jan Barber.
Hello, and thank you very much for,
And I'm sorry, could you please keep the mask up?
okay,
Sorry.
all
Thank
right.
you.
Everyone has different rules around the microphones. Hello, my name is Jan Barber, and I live in Colonial Forest. About 2 months ago, I gathered 41 signatures on a petition, and my colleague, Tony Kim, gathered 25 or so. And the petition related to the Bally's, 6 acres of the Bally's lot that is across the street from us. The petition noted that we are hoping that if it goes to multifamily, that it could be for homeowners and hopefully condominiums. We are concerned, several of us have been homeowners in condominiums around there for a number of years. We've kept them up, and we're pleased with the area. And we had some concerns that about the quality of life, and also perhaps the value of our homes should, depending on the final decisions that the commission makes regarding that property. We spoke at the Planning Commission. We have understood that the LUTC will be receiving a package from the Planning Commission, and that will occur sometime in January or February. The Planning Commission has indicated they've put together some wording that is going to go through the lawyers related to the agreement. And I understand that there may be new commissioners in that position in the LUTC by the time the Bally's agreement reaches you folks. But I wanted to be sure and leave a foot in the door, as it were, so that people are aware that it's coming. The petition will be something like Exhibit C or Exhibit D related to the package. And we're hoping that representing more than 60 or 70 homeowners in the area, we're hoping that those taxpayers and voters are listened to. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe that concludes our public comments. Okay, thank you. Okay, we are moving on to committee business. The first item is item A, approval of minutes, November 1st, 2021.
I move approval of the minutes of November 1st, 2021.
And I will second that. Do we have any discussion? Question? No? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The matter passed 2-0. We are moving to item B, resolution ratification of the 2021 WRIA 9 Salmon Habitat Plan. EJ?
Good evening, good evening, Chair Tran, Council President, members of council. My name is EJ Walsh. I'm the Public Works Director, and tonight I'm actually here to introduce Matt Garrick from King County. He is the King County RIA 9 coordinator and works for the county. So the City of Federal Way has been involved with RIA 9 going back since approximately 2000. So we had, as a city, we had ratified the RIA 9 work plan, the original one, and King County has updated it since then. So this is actually the second version of that plan. And just in the spirit of context, I will note that Councilmember Asefa Dawson is also a member of the RIA 9 and represents the city on that committee. So with that, I will introduce Matt and ask him to take it away.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, good evening, Chair, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity today to speak to you about salmon recovery and specifically the Salmon Habitat Plan update for the Green Duwamish and Central Puget Sound watershed. My name is Matt Goring, and I'm the RIA 9 Salmon Recovery Manager. So how did we get here? Puget Sound Chinook have experienced a sustained decline over the last 150 years. This decline culminated with the listing of Puget Sound Chinook in 1999 under the Endangered Species Act. In response, the state created a framework for local watershed-based organizations to provide the backbone of salmon recovery efforts across the state. These organizations, such as RIA 9, help bring together diverse interests within our watersheds to build local support for salmon recovery. In 2001, the 17 local governments in our watershed joined together and signed an interlocal agreement to collectively support salmon recovery efforts. There was a recognition that for salmon recovery to be successful, we had to have a collective lift across all of the watershed. So RIA 9 developed the original salmon recovery plan in 2005. This ultimately became a chapter of the Puget Sound Chinook Salmon Recovery Plan in 2007. Since then, this has been the blueprint for salmon recovery across our watershed for the last 15 years. So this is just a snapshot of RIA 9. You can see it's a diverse watershed. Goes from Federal Way here in the south up north to Elliott Bay in Seattle, and then all the way up the Duwamish Green to the crest of the Cascades and U.S. Forest Service lands. So this watershed-based approach has a lot of benefits. First and foremost, it allows us to take a holistic view in identifying limiting factors and allows us to make investments where the expected benefits to salmon recovery are the largest, regardless of its jurisdictional alignment. So RIA 9 staffs a watershed ecosystem forum, which oversees our work program, as well as has decision-making authority over any funding recommendations. And I just want to take a moment to thank Councilmember Asefa Dawson for her participation on this forum. So the RIA 9 construct has been extremely successful in securing local, state, and federal funding sources. With over $200 million of investments, partners have been able to realign more than 2 miles of levees to reconnect floodplains, restore almost 4,700 feet of marine shoreline, revegetate over 500 acres of land, and restore almost 6 acres of estuary habitat. So the pictures here are Seahurst Park to the north of here, before and after restoration. And to this date, it remains one of the largest shoreline restoration projects in Puget Sound, and it's an outstanding example of how we balance multi-benefit use in an urban setting. So just want to take a moment to thank Federal Way for their long-term support. Collectively, ILA partners have contributed $8.4 million to this program, $367,000 from Federal Way. This is a significant investment, and it's helped build our collaborative partnership and position us for the success we've been able to achieve. So this here is just a snapshot of Salmon Returns since 1990. The green line is wild fish, and the blue line is total fish, including hatchery supplementations. You can see that since here, the listing in 1999, we really haven't been able to drive a significant rebound in Chinook. And behind this figure here, numbers in 2009 actually collapsed to an all-time low of less than 200 adult fish returning to the system. Since then, we've seen a general increase, but we're still, in 5 out of the last 10 years, below our short-term goal, which is a range between 1,000 and 4,200 returning fish. So fast forward to the plan update today. This represents the next chapter of salmon recovery in our watershed. The plan update process really did validate the strength of the original 2005 plan. As a result, you can think of it really more of a series of tweaks and modifications rather than a comprehensive overhaul. By incorporating new best available science, it provides an updated framework for identifying and prioritizing recovery actions across the watershed for the next 10 to 15 years, contains 11 overarching recovery strategies, and over 100 capital habitat project ideas. So Federal Way lies within the marine nearshore subwatershed. As juvenile Chinook leave the Duwamish and enter Elliott Bay, they depend on these shallow marine shoreline waters for critical rearing and refuge habitat. As you know, development has significantly altered the stretch of marine shoreline. About 2/3 of the shoreline is now armored, which has resulted in habitat degradation. As a result, recovery actions in this area of the watershed really do focus on reducing the impacts of shoreline armoring, promoting soft shore stabilization where appropriate, and eliminating fish passage barriers. These recommendations highlight the need for sea level rise adaptation, as well as increased technical assistance for shoreline homeowners. The plan also outlines 39 capital projects in the marine nearshore. One I'll highlight real quick is Camp Kilworth. Most of you are probably aware of that. That's a 25-acre property with 900 feet of unarmored feeder bluffs habitat. This was recently acquired by Forterra and the YMCA with about $575,000 provided by the RIA. So in terms of implementation, RIA 9 really is committed to working with all of our partners, including Federal Way, to support plan implementation. We develop an annual funding package to fund high-priority projects. This is on the order of $4 to $5 million per year, depending on the year. Our primary funding sources are cooperative watershed management funds from the King County Flood Control District, as well as state salmon recovery grants. We work with all of our partners to maintain a 6-year kind of capital improvement program to help plan out our investments. And shown here is the Camp Kilworth property. So in terms of ratification, the Watershed Ecosystem Forum unanimously approved the plan back in February. The final step is local government ratification. Ratification acknowledges local government support of the plan, as well as a commitment to working collaboratively to support implementation. It also acknowledges that salmon recovery is not a standalone initiative. It's inherently linked to other community priorities such as flood risk reduction, recreation, and stormwater management. And finally, ratification recognizes the plan as a new source of best available science that can and should probably be used to inform local action. So before I open it up to any questions, I just wanted to highlight the rest of the RIA 9 staff team. Although we're housed at King County Department of Natural Resources and Parks, we really are the collective staff of the Watershed Ecosystem Forum. So with that, we stand ready to support the City of Federal Way in advancing salmon recovery. And please don't hesitate to contact me if we can be of any assistance. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Committee members, council members, you have any questions for Matt? Go ahead.
I have a question that's, I'm new to it, and so my first, RIA 9, WRIA, what does it stand for? And what does the 9 mean?
Yeah, so it's Water Resource Inventory A, or Inventory Area 9. And so the 9 is just the numeral designation of our watershed. So the Cedar Sammamish is RIA 8, the Puyallup is RIA 10.
Okay, thank you.
Council members,
No, my-
except for Dawson?
Sorry. I just wanted to say thank you for coming and thank you for this. This is a great program, and I learned so much by just being there. And just wanted to share my appreciation and also for your participation in what happens in Federal Way. Because sometimes we don't recognize that we are a coast, we have that water. And so, like when we talk about Kilworth. And so just wanted to acknowledge what RIA 9 is doing. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for your ongoing support. Appreciate it.
Council President, go ahead.
I have a motion.
Oh, I will take the motion.
All right. I move to forward the proposed resolution to the January 4th, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
And I will second that. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The matter passed 2-0. Thank you. We are now moving on to item C, 2020 Asphalt Overlay Project, final acceptance. John?
Thank you, Chair Tran, Council President Honda, and other members of the council present tonight. I am here to present to you project acceptance of the 2020 Asphalt Overlay Project. Yes, 2020, unfortunately. We had some delays with local water district, so First Avenue was delayed a bit, so it was finished up this summer. Policy question I have before you today is, should the council accept the 2020 Asphalt Overlay Project constructed by Miles Resources, LLC, as complete? Financial impacts, there is none. This is acceptance of construction is complete, and no additional funds are proposed to be spent as part of the agenda bill. I know that sometimes we talk about these areas. A map is always handy, so these are the areas that were covered under the 2020 Asphalt Overlay. Schedule C, as seen there, First Avenue to city limits, was the delay that was completed this summer. Background information on the project. Prior to the release of retainage on a public works construction project, the City Council must accept the work as complete to meet State Department of Revenue and State Department of Labor and Industries requirements. The project overlaid 8 different locations equal to about 5.5 lane miles, as well as numerous ADA improvements, some of which you may have seen at the corner of 320th and Pack Highway South, which improves access to those with disabilities. A little background information on the budget. The initial approved budget, including contingency, was about $2.7 million. The construction contract came in at about $2.3 million, and we ended up the whole project at a little over $400,000 under budget. Funding was provided by the Motor Vehicle Fuel Tax, Fund 102, Real Estate Excise Tax. The Ridge was funded. That was done there. PSE Joint Construction Agreement on PVR, which was funded. The TIB grant for complete streets for $100,000. Traffic impact fees, lift, and additional funds for complete streets. Options considered tonight, authorize final acceptance of the 2020 asphalt overlay constructed by Miles Resources in the amount of $2,333,375.66, or do not authorize acceptance of the 2020 asphalt overlay project as constructed by Miles Resources in the amount of $2,333,375.66 and provide direction to staff. Mayor's recommendation is to forward option 1 to the January 4th, 2022 council consent agenda for approval. And as always, I'm here for any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation, Council President Honda.
Thank you. Have any other HOAs or neighborhoods put money into overlaying their streets in the history of the city?
In short, yes. We've had other HOAs and business parks where it's been a public street through their area provide funding. Not regularly, I will say that, but in general, the answer is yes. It's not unprecedented.
So did the city ask for that, or did the HOAs ask for their streets to be overlaid?
So this was part of the dedication agreement from the Ridge originally. So the Ridge streets were privately owned and maintained by the HOA. So they, instead of choosing to upgrade the streets to meet the standards to allow for dedication, they asked to dedicate funds and incorporate this, the city's contractor to do that work instead of them taking it on themselves. That we were able to leverage the ability of our contractors just because of this and the amount of other work we were doing to get basically a better deal for the Ridge HOA. But it was a part of the condition of dedicating the roads and meeting the standards.
And that's, when this has happened before, that's been the same issue?
So I'm aware of one business park that asked for their roads to be overlaid, and they did not rate low enough for the city to warrant doing it, and they chose to basically pay us to improve the streets around that. Which was not related to a dedication. But beyond that, I believe the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Sanford Dawson.
Thank you. So you may have answered my question. Is that what the Ridge is then? And that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So, Chair Tran?
Yes, go ahead.
EJ, how many HOAs and private business parks are there that maintain their own roads? I think Colonial Forest may be one.
They are. I'm not sure the exact answer of that off the top of my head, council member. I would say there's more business communities that do than HOAs. Most of the HOAs are public streets at this point, but there are a lot of private streets in business areas throughout the city.
Huh. Thank you.
Before we vote on this item, I just want to recognize the good work that staff did. I mean, you guys came in below, more than $400,000. That is the big saving for the city. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. It's a
Thank you.
pleasure.
I move to forward option 1 to the January 4th, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
And I will second that. Any other discussion, questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The matter passed 2-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We are moving on to item D, Lakota Middle School Safe Route to School, SW-Point Road, Letter of Understanding with Verizon.
Hold on. Oh, thank you, Chair Tran, council and committee members. My name is John Mulkey. I'm Senior Capital Engineer for the City of Federal Way. Excuse me, and I'm presenting the Lakota Middle School, Dash Point Road, Safe Route to School, Verizon Letter of Understanding. Let's see. The policy question is, should the council authorize the mayor to execute the letter of understanding with Verizon for the Lakota Middle School Southwest Dash Point Road Safe Route to School project? Background information. The city has required Verizon to relocate underground facilities into an underground duct and vault system. The letter of understanding is being pursued in an effort to reduce both cost and extended public disruption of the area. Verizon will reimburse the city for having the city's contractor to install conduit and relocating one vault supplied by Comcast as part of the joint utility trench of the project. Total estimated cost which Comcast will reimburse the city is approximately $23,000. And the final reimbursable amount by Comcast to the city will be based on the bid prices and actual quantities of work that are completed. This is just a section showing on Dash Point Road between 21st Avenue at the intersection along the frontage of Lakota Park, that where the actual work will be done as part of our other work that's part of illumination project. We'll be working in that area too, and that's just the extent of a portion of the area that their trench will be relocated. It's currently we're being in conflict with the curb and gutter and the new storm drain that we're going to be installing, so either they have to relocate it to a completely different location or they relocate it along with us. And it's easier for them to do that. And so the options before council are: 1, authorize the mayor to execute the letter of understanding with Verizon for the Lakota Middle School Southwest Dash Point Road Safe Route to School project, or 2, do not authorize the mayor to execute the letter of understanding with Verizon for the Lakota Middle School Southwest Dash Point Road Safe Route to School project and provide directions to staff. The mayor's recommendations: the mayor recommends forwarding option 1 to the January 4, 2022 City Council consent agenda for approval, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, John. Council members, Asphalt Dawson.
Yeah. In your presentation, on one of the slides, you talk about Comcast?
Oh, I messed up.
Oh, okay.
That would be just a typo.
All right,
Should have been
thank
Verizon.
Okay.
Good catch. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Tran. So I'm trying to understand, John, so some of the wireless companies, we have cable underground as well as the wireless connections?
Yeah,
on
this
the
is
pole?
actually, if there's Verizon, there's more than one Verizon. So this is Verizon Underground versus Verizon Aerial. So this is a different group, DBA Verizon. It's actually got a really long Metro Media something, DBA Verizon Underground. We just went with Verizon to make it a lot easier and more real, but it is a Verizon DBA, but it's an underground. It's working on the 5G system and stuff like that they're putting out there. They have a system that runs through our area.
Great, well, we do want 5G.
Yep.
If you happen to talk to the guys with the aerial, I've mentioned this before, but it's so irritating. We have 2 spots in this community that I'm aware of with Verizon that have blank reception, which is 312th and First and 320th and First. I mean, our calls get dropped there all the time. It's very frustrating. I don't know if you could pass that on.
Yeah, there's more than there's more than that.
More than those.
There's more than those.
Is it just endemic with Verizon, or is it?
Oh, no,
carriers?
I'm not an expert on wireless communication, but each one will have like strengths and areas and other areas where they're down. It's how close are they? We actually had a project on 47th and Dash Point Road where we have no Verizon coverage, but there's an AT&T pole right there. So our inspectors using a phone with AT&T and an iPad with Verizon so that they can use everything back and forth and stuff like that, but it isn't totally uncommon that there's different services better in different areas.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none?
I move to forward option 1 to the January 4th, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
I will second that. I don't see any questions. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the matter passed 2-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, now we are moving on to adaptive traffic control city center phase 2, 85% design status report and authorization to bid. that will be presented by Naveen.
Good evening, Chair Tran and members of the City Council. For the record, I'm Naveen Chandra, Senior Capital Engineer with the City of Edelweiss. I'm here to present Adaptive Traffic Signal Control, City Center Phase 2, 85% design report and authorization to bid. Policy question. Should the City Council authorize staff to bid the Adaptive Traffic Signal Control City Center Phase 2 project and return to the LUTC and Council to award the project to the lowest responsible bidder? Financial impacts. The cost to the Adaptive Traffic Signal Control City Center Phase 2 project was included within the approved budget under the Public Works Department Capital Project number 233. In accordance with the approved budget, this item is funded by a grant from Puget Sound Regional Council, PSRC, in the amount of $600,000 and the remainder in city funds. Upon completion of the project, ongoing costs associated with the operations and maintenance will be performed and funded through streets maintenance. Funding requirements for operations and maintenance of infrastructure is reviewed and adjusted as required during the budget process. Background information. The Adaptive Traffic Control System, ATCS, is a system that monitors the traffic conditions in real time and modifies the signal timing every signal cycle. This reduces delays and stops, thus improving both air quality and safety. This project adds the ATS detection at 9 intersections in the city center area, which were deleted in the previous phase due to the lack of funds. This project also adds surveillance cameras and automated traffic signal performance measures to the major corridors of South 320th Street and Pacific Highway. This is the vicinity map. You can see the 9 intersections would be 3 along PVR and 4 along 23rd, 1 at 320th and 8th, and another one is 11th and 13th at 324. Those are the 9 intersections. Progress to date. As-built review and field investigation has been completed. Project has been designed to 85%, and we have secured the NEPA approval. Ongoing task would be to prepare the final plan specifications and estimation to bid the project and obtain WashDOT approval to bid the project. Estimated expenditures. Design, that would be the city cost at $26,000. The consultant would be $48,360. Construction cost would be $580,000. Construction contingency would be $58,000. Construction management, city staff would be $67,000. Construction management support from the consultant would be $20,000. Construction inspection support from King County would be $20,000. And then the construction management and inspection by WashDOT would be $5,000 for a total project cost of $825,000. Available funding, PSRC grant, $600,000. City funds, that is REIT, that would be $75,000. City funds, which is 306 funds, unallocated restricted funds, which consists of real estate excise tax, motor vehicle excise tax, and traffic impact fee. Fund transfer will be requested at the bid award after refining the total cost based on the actual award amount. So the total budget needed would be $825,000. Options considered: authorize staff to bid the Adaptive Traffic Signal Control City Center Phase 2 project and return to the LUTC and Council to award the project to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Number 2, do not authorize staff to bid this project and provide direction to staff. Mayor's recommendation. Mayor recommends forwarding option 1 to the January 4th, 2022 City Council consent agenda for approval. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Naveen. Council President Honda.
Thank you. Can you go back to the 9 intersections that are being funded now,
Sure.
please?
Thanks.
Yeah. So I can ask a question while you're looking, I suppose. Maybe not.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Didn't mean to cause a problem. Can you explain to me why we would need the 3 lights here at the PVR road done? You know, it's such a tiny little road, and it seems like we really don't need to spend money on getting those lights all lined up.
I'll handle that. For the record, Rick Perez, City Traffic Engineer. So basically, we've already, as part of Phase 1, we've gotten the detection upgraded at the other intersections on Phase 1. So this is just completing the system to be consistent. And yes, the PVR in particular is probably not the highest priority for coordination, but we want to be prepared for it for future growth, and also being able to help optimize operations for Rapid Ride A-Line. And let's see, there's also the 901 that uses 312. So, but keeping all those signals in sync is the primary impetus and for basically completing the detection upgrades system-wide.
Okay. Huh. All right, so I have another question. I noticed there are new utility boxes at the intersection of 320th and 99. Are they for this program? They're on the side of the tool store.
Oh, well, let's see, what was that for? That wasn't pertaining to the adaptive system.
Okay.
We did replace one cabinet here recently. If I recall, EJ, you may remember better than I do, but there was a knockdown in there, wasn't there?
There was a knockdown, and then we found additional vandalism to the point that we had to replace it to make it functional. That's why the system was running on recall, and we were getting complaints about it over there.
Okay, because they're really noticeable because they're so nice and shiny.
They're nice and shiny because and then they also got cleaned up when we cleaned up that corner with the vegetation and everything. We cleaned all the graffiti and everything off of them, which made them nice and shiny as a byproduct of that.
All right, okay, thank you.
So, Rick, I have a suggestion. Maybe for the benefits of the public and some of us, can you go back and explain to us a little bit about what is the benefit of the adaptive control signal?
Okay, so the primary purpose of an adaptive system is to improve coordination overall and reduce delays. So, you know, in the old days, it used to be just fixed time, signal timing, which is what you mostly see in downtown Seattle. Works well in downtown areas where the traffic patterns are very predictable. So as we get into more suburban environments, that doesn't work very well because the volumes vary more dramatically and are often unpredictable. So the next level in terms of signal coordination is actually fairly rudimentary. It's where we set up a timing plan that the only variation is how much traffic or how much green time gets allocated to the main street left turn phases and then the side street phases, okay? And any unused green time out of that goes back to the major street coordination. And so adaptive takes it a level further where it's constantly evaluating how much green time each phase needs at the traffic signal. And based on input from the detectors. So it also attempts to forecast when the next platoon of traffic is coming. So it is more sophisticated in that regard. And as a result, well, probably the best example I heard is Bellevue's been running adaptive in this region longer than anybody. And when they were rebuilding this Northeast 8th Street interchange on 405, they had to shut down the freeway for an entire weekend. And so, you know, normally you'd say, oh, that much traffic being diverted onto the public street system, that's going to be an absolute disaster. So the city of Bellevue notified all the businesses in downtown, this could be a challenging weekend. Be prepared. They had no complaints. Now, it's not that there wasn't capacity problems, but it was so much less than people anticipated as a result of that diversion that was like, they attributed the difference to the system. Now, being this is, you know, Bellevue had had that system for quite a long time, so they understood how to optimize it. This is our first foray, and actually, between the different phases, we're taking on a lot of intersections all at once. So there's going to be a learning curve for staff as well. And that's partially how the automated traffic signal performance measures plays into it, that it will help us fine-tune the base plan that the adaptive is constantly revising and allow us to be more efficient with that.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Councilmember Asefa Dawson, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's a follow-up to what Council President Honda said. So Rapid Ride A and 901 all travel on 316, correct?
So the 901 uses 312, and Rapid Ride A line uses 316.
Okay, so going back to her question, then how do those three lights impact
So,
west,
right,
east-west versus north-south?
sure. So since the primary goal is to keep traffic moving as efficiently as possible, any transit preemptions, especially on A line, affects the signal coordination up and down 20th, PVR way. So that's why it's important to enhance that detection. They can see the buses coming earlier and minimize the disruption to the coordination on 20th at the same time.
I actually have another question. If there's an emergency vehicle coming, they override the entire system, including the staff person here that's controlling it?
Yes. So, yeah, and there's two levels of preemption. There's emergency vehicle preemption, and then there's transit priority. So the A line has transit priority that can also be overridden by emergency vehicle preemption.
So on 320th, does transit have priority?
At this point, they aren't running it now, We anticipate that with the upgrades planned for the Route 181, that Metro will be requesting that. We should be finding a little bit more about that in the coming year as to how they want to restructure the service. Originally, that was supposed to be another rapid ride line by 2024. They had to delay that. So they're looking at some interim improvements in the meantime.
Okay, thank you. Ready? I move to forward option 1 to the January 4th, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. Is there any other discussion? There are none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye?
Aye. The matter passed 2-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are moving on to item F, acceptance of Housing Action Plan implementation grant. Jenny?
Good evening, Council President Honda and the Land Use and Transportation Committee. I'm Janie Skatson, and I'm here presenting on the request to accept the Housing Action Plan implementation state funds. I'm going to go over a little background. So in 2019, the Washington State Legislature passed House Bill 1923, which provided funding for the City of Federal Way to develop our Housing Action Plan. On October 4th, the City Council authorized staff to submit 2 grant applications through the Department of Commerce. And on October 19th, the City Council approved the city's Housing Action Plan. Here's an update on those 2 grant applications. So there was a $100,000 grant application and that was the Housing Action Plan Implementation Grant, also known as HAPPY. And this will be used for, and we were granted this money. We were awarded this $100,000 to be used for a market analysis to evaluate multifamily market, rents, construction costs, regulations, and incentives in our high-impact mixed-use zones. And another grant that we applied for was for $250,000, and that was a transportation-oriented development implementation grant, and we were not granted those funds. That application was to conduct an analysis and design of 21st Avenue South into a non-motorized corridor that connects the PAC Town Center Park transit station with the Commons Mall through a grade separation across 320th. So those were the 2 grants. The financial impact of accepting the $100,000 Housing Action Plan implementation grant, there is none. So this does not require any city matching. Only the staff time that will be needed to manage the funds will be, and track the grant, will be of the city's obligation. This, the Housing Action Plan, HAPPY grant, will be implementing strategies 5 and 6, which are to ensure that our financial and regulatory incentives for mixed use or mixed income housing are effective, and to also review our school impact fees on multifamily housing. The goal of this, or the objective with this grant, is to evaluate our stagnation in multifamily development, examining existing incentives and barriers to the production of new housing, and proposing new incentives and process improvements that will facilitate a more balanced housing mix while meeting policy goals. The mayor proposes to accept this grant. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Jenny. Council President?
So my question is, for multifamily, you've heard many of us, if not all of us, say we really would like to see condos built instead of rental multifamily. So will this be studying how we can get condos built in this area?
Currently, the scope is not explicitly looking at homeownership versus renter. It's more so a pro forma of the cost of land and development. So, no.
It would be really great if we could figure out how we could get condos built, especially in the downtown core, and what incentives we need to provide to do that.
Yeah, I
But this isn't going to study that.
currently, as the scope's written, it doesn't distinguish between homeownership and rental,
Okay.
just more the multifamily, but the contract has not been finalized. We have not accepted the grant, so we can work to consider including homeownership as a line item.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kochma.
I agree, Council President Honda. We are concerned with home ownership, especially for first-time home buyers. And a lot of the time, that has to be a condo because there's no way first-time home buyers working minimum wage or even a couple of jobs can afford the houses in our area. And, you know, I'm also concerned about the $250,000 grant that we didn't receive. Was that to be crossing 320th from the transit garage to the mall?
If we were granted those funds, we would have conducted an analysis and design for a pedestrian or non-motorized crossing.
So the fact that we didn't receive it is, you know, that's one thing, but will we be able to apply for funds in the future? Hi, EJ, you're.
Oh.
Will that be a possibility for a future application? Absolutely, we need that. We're going to have people trying to cross from the garage to the commons.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely believe in the importance of that proposal. And there are other grant opportunities that exist that are within or outside of the Department of Commerce or within like complete streets. It just happened that the scope of these grants, the Department of Commerce didn't see it meeting the criteria.
So I'm wondering if, in fact, do you have any idea of any grants that might be available in the future? Or is this something maybe that we need to include perhaps in one of our requests with our lobbyists for federal funding next year? I'm just trying to kind of narrow this down to make sure we get some funding coming for a study on that crossing, because it's such a huge street and people are going to be crossing that and they're going to be running out in traffic.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we are keeping our eyes open for grant opportunities to connect our downtown for pedestrians. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. So that would be a real concern, particularly when, for example, if we get more up in your grant, maybe what you need to also include is the fact that a lot of these, if it's going to be apartments, a lot of the apartments will require only one car per apartment, which isn't the case at all. It's usually 2 cars per apartment, and there's going to be people trying to park in the garage or park elsewhere. We're going to have more pedestrian traffic. That's going to be an issue. So if it's apartments, we're looking at one issue. If it's condos and people who are going to be home buyers, that's going to be a better. I think what I need to understand is how many low-income, because we always call it market rate or we call it affordable housing. I need to know how many apartments we have, how much affordable housing we have in our downtown core, for example, versus condos in our downtown core. I mean, if you want to build, I've had, this is kind of a chicken and an egg speech. I don't want to get into a long, I've talked about this before. 20 years ago, I talked about this. Do you know what comes first? Do you bring the retail in first, and then you bring in the homeowner, or do you bring the homeowner first and then the retail? Well, I was always told by retail, oh, you bring in the homeowner first. That's going to spur the retail. Well, that's not necessarily the case. So I guess I need to know what the mix is, what we have. What do we have for first-time home buyers? I mean, what actually availability is there, in particular in the downtown core? So I'd be interested in that, and then also, help us understand where to find the funding for pedestrian crossings. That's going to be a big issue. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jeannie.
Jenny, I do have a question regarding the $250,000 total grant that we did not get. Do you know the reason why we did not get that? And is there another chance that we can reapply?
Yeah, so we believed that our application, our proposal for the Transportation-Oriented Development Implementation Grant would be a placemaking activity or proposal that would help connect our downtown. The Department of Commerce saw this as an infrastructure project, which we don't believe it is. So we were unable to convince them. So we did try. We had a follow-up meeting. And were unsuccessful in that. And what was your second question?
Well, I think you already answered that question.
Future funding?
Will we be able to reapply or modify our application and reapply?
So all of the TODI grant funding has been allocated. So not in this year. It's possible that there will be more funding available in the future, or we'll be looking for alternative sources.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. I think this question would be more for EJ, but if you can answer it, that's fine. So the council put $75,000 into the budget for this year to work with a consultant on the downtown area. And that $75,000 actually, we decided to put it into, I believe, this $250,000 grant, didn't we? Wasn't that the match that we were going to use for this? Or am I confused, which is possible?
I will try to answer that, Council President Honda, if we're talking about the same pot of money. So the council actually allocated, the one I'm thinking of is $100,000 for downtown. And we are still holding that in place to do, because we're due for an update of the downtown comprehensive plan chapter, along with the rest of the comprehensive plan. So along with this grant that Cheney's talking about, we'll use this money to hopefully give the council a better indication of what downtown could be for the city and what the council wants for it. So the $100,000 has not been spent yet, has not been specifically, I mean, it's been designated for what it can be spent for, but it's not been spent yet. We wanted to seek external sources to hopefully save the council some money first, but we also wanted to have this money in reserve to enhance what we will be getting out of this grant as well.
Didn't we have a discussion, though, on having a pedestrian walkway from the PAC all the way to the mall,
We did.
to the commons?
Yes, conceptually, we have talked about that. And that was what the $250,000 was going to go towards. To start that discussion now that we did not get that grant, we need to really have a look at the traffic modeling for the downtown, because that's effectively taking 21st and modifying its purpose or its use as primarily right now a vehicular north-south connection. And so if there is going to be a look at what 21st is as far as mode of transportation or the emphasis of mode of transportation that it carries, specifically to be more pedestrian oriented, then we need to look at what impacts that's going to create to vehicular traffic, because we can't just take the cars out and expect everything to be fine.
Correct. I remember talking to you about this. So the money that the council was going to use for a consultant was going to go into this to either, to do the traffic study then, to see if this is possible?
Yeah, so right now we're, that's one of the possibilities is a short answer, yes, because in order to have that next discussion about that north-south connection, we need to really identify what the traffic impacts are, because we don't want to blow up downtown by removing one of the vehicular connection points.
And that's going to happen in 2022. We're going to be doing this.
Yes. Well, it will, yes. Yes,
So
correct.
then is making this a pedestrian walkway from the PAC to the commons off the table? Or is that something we're still looking into?
No, so the purpose of that traffic modeling study would be to determine if we removed or decreased the amount of vehicular trips on 21st and made it more pedestrian friendly, what that would do to the rest of downtown. What would that do to the other north-south connections? What would it do to alleviate 320th? Because right now, 21st serves as somewhat of relief point that goes on to 316th, I believe is the.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we sort of take that blood vessel, so to speak, and constrict it, how does that affect the rest of the body?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion if there's no other questions.
Okay. I move to forward option 1 to the January 4th, 2022 consent agenda for approval.
And I will second that. Any other discussion?
I just want to bring up the fact
ahead.
that at some point, we do need to talk about a pedestrian overpass. I know that Sound Transit isn't going to pay for that, but perhaps that's another issue that we can look at for funding in the future. That's going to be a huge issue, getting from that garage across the street to the mall. I just think by 2024, the garage is going to be built. We're going to need to have something in place. Thank you.
Thank you for that reminder. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The matter passed 2-0. Thank you. And the next item is item G, progress update on South Transit project in Federal Way. Ryan, welcome.
I'm ahead of myself.
All right. Good evening, Chair Tran, Council President Honda, and council members. My name is Ryan Medlin. I'm the city liaison to Sound Transit, here to provide the monthly informational update. Starting with Federal Way Link Extension, construction that has been continuing with regards to construction of some guideway walls will continue. This will support the laying of the future track along I-5 from the city of Kent down to 317th. They will also be continuing column construction near South Star Lake and Military Road, having just finished up drilling some column shafts near 288th and Military Road. From Thanksgiving to the first business day after the new year, there is a moratorium on traffic control in the city center area. During this time, you'll still see work going on the station platform structure in the vicinity of the Federal Way Transit Center. And you will also see them working on some utility relocations along the west garage entrance at 21st. They were recently constructing a column or drilling the shaft for a column near Marlene's parking lot. That did require them blocking one of the driveway entrances off 317th, and that work is expected to finish up here shortly, and it will be reopened. For the OMF South, the preferred alternative will be subject to a recommendation from the Sound Transit System Expansion Committee at their meeting on December 9th for a recommendation or for a vote by the Sound Transit Board in identifying a preferred alternative at their December 16th board meeting. Both those meetings will be virtual, and there is no update to the Tacoma Dome Link extension since the previous LUTC meeting. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Kochmar.
Thank you. Where are we on the art project?
The art project, they're in part due to the pandemic and in part trying to get participation. They're still collecting public comments. We're still expecting them to submit a summary of kind of the outreach effort that they've done and public comments that they've heard. And then they would follow up with a presentation to council after that comment summary is presented.
Council President Honda.
Thank you. Do you know when they'll start building the building, whatever it's going to be called, where the Red Robin was?
The end of line facility.
Okay.
There on the south side. I do not know the exact timeline. I would expect this coming year. They have to do some columns that in the Commons parking lot that will probably be their higher priority. I don't know a definitive date to answer that question with, but the last schedule I saw would have it starting, the building itself starting in the middle towards latter half of the year.
How many columns will there be in the Target parking lot?
There will be 3 that are the single columns and 1 that will be what's called the straddle bent columns, where there's the 2-column.
And how close to the building will those be?
I don't know the distance. It won't go right up to the building. That will be whenever they extend it to continue it south. I believe it stops generally about halfway through that parking. So you have that entrance that comes in off 23rd, and then you have kind of those southern rows of parking. About a third to a halfway down one of those parking lot aisles will be the last one.
So when the decision is made for the OMF South, and let's assume that, let's say it's one of the Federal Way sites, is there anything we can do at that point to convince Sound Transit that that was not a good choice, or is,
So
at that point, what can we do?
So the action that they're taking this month is to identify the preferred alternative. So it's not the final decision. That will come with the after the publication of the final environmental impact statement. So there's another round of comments and publication and public comments, as well as another board action that would come up generally towards the end of 2022. The Q4 of 2022 is when they would be expecting it. So procedurally speaking, that would be the window that it's still feasible to convince them to make another choice, because they haven't made the final decision. So that would be the best answer I can give to your question right now.
Okay. And do you know when they'll be going over 320th with the rail line? So I know they need the columns on the other side, but
I don't know the date. There will be ample public notice when that does happen, because even though it'll occur in non-peak hours and at night,
okay.
it's still a very large street to be impacting. So I don't know the date. If I had to guess, I would say we're probably looking at optimistically in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you, Ryan, for that update. Since this is for information only, there's no action needed from this committee.
All right, thank
Thank
you
you.
for your time.
We are moving on to item H, ordinance modifying the city's nuisance code. Ken?
Good evening, committee members, council members. I'm here tonight to discuss proposed changes to the city nuisance code, specifically 2 sections that are proposed to be changed regarding chronic nuisances and also regarding emergency abatement of nuisances. So the question before you tonight is, should the city amend Titles 6 and 12 of the Federal Way Revised Code to specifically address those 2 things I mentioned? 1, chronic nuisance properties, and 2, emergency summary abatement of severe and emergent nuisances. So a little bit of background here, and even before I jump into this slide, I think it would be helpful if I defined what a nuisance is generally for the committee and council members. Generally, a public nuisance is many different things. It's something that's unreasonably offensive to the senses, is the legal terminology. Examples of a public nuisance might be a property that's filthy, covered with trash, has not been cleaned up in some time. Another example might be a property where there's untrimmed vegetation that's leaning out over the public sidewalk or over the public right-of-way, creating some sort of a danger. Those are just 2 examples, but When you think about public nuisances, they can be very broad. It's a lot of different things. And so generally, the city code already regulates general and specific nuisances, and the current enforcement mechanism to deal with nuisances is for code enforcement to issue notices of violation. Along with those notices of violation, there's orders to correct the violation. And if the violation is not corrected, there's opportunities for the city to impose civil fines on a per day, per violation basis, and also to abate properties if the property owner fails to comply with the notice of violation and the orders to correct. So in looking at our code and looking at factual situations in the city and other cities, we've identified that the city does not have a mechanism to identify and rectify underlying issues at chronic nuisance properties. And when I say chronic nuisance properties, I'm talking about a property that has a history of repeat violations. So not a one-off offender, if you will, but rather a property where 3 months, 3 months passes and a notice of violation is issued, another 3 months passes, and the code enforcement has to issue another notice of violation, repeat offenders, so to speak. And then along with that, the city does not have a mechanism to swiftly deal with what I'll call emergency nuisance conditions. So those are nuisance conditions that have the potential for extreme harm to public health and safety on a very short timeline. And as I believe I referenced earlier, many of the surrounding jurisdictions, cities, and also counties surrounding us have mechanisms in their code to address both of these separate situations. And so the proposed code changes, again, the two categories of proposed code changes, first starting with the chronic nuisance property code changes. It would define a chronic nuisance property as a property with 3 or more instances of civil nuisance or criminal nuisance conduct attributable to the property within a 60-day period, or 7 or more instances within a 12-month period. If something falls into that definition of a chronic nuisance property, then code enforcement is authorized to use the normal civil enforcement mechanisms for abatement of that chronic nuisance condition. The distinction here is that instead of saying you have brush over the right-of-way, clear the brush back a little bit so that it no longer encroaches over the public sidewalk, if you have that same brush violation 7 times in a calendar year, the notice of violation might say, remove the plant that is consistently growing over the public sidewalk. And additionally, in addition to that civil enforcement that I just discussed, the ordinance or the proposed code changes would allow the police chief to enforce the chronic nuisance property code criminally. By the way, just so you know, that's the way the nuisance code generally works in the city. Code enforcement is able to enforce it civilly. Police are able to enforce it criminally. So there's nothing really different in that respect. Now on to the second category of code changes, the emergency summary abatement. Before I tell you what the emergency summary abatement would allow us to do, let me go through what the current process would allow us to do without the emergency summary abatement. So currently, let's say there is a situation in the city where there's a direct, perhaps this is a bad example because it's a public works water violation, but if you bear with me, if there's a violation where there's oil being leaked directly into a stream or or there's a situation that creates an imminent fire hazard where something could catch on fire and immediately burn something valuable down. Currently, the notice of violation and abatement process takes at a minimum a couple weeks to resolve that before the city's able to go in and abate. So if you have a compliant property owner, it can get dealt with very quickly, but if you don't, we're talking at a minimum weeks and possibly months if that notice of violation is appealed and goes through additional legal process. So under the current system, we're looking at weeks to months for dealing with a serious emergent issue in terms of a nuisance. So what this section here would do is it would authorize code enforcement to summarily and immediately abate any condition that constitutes a severe and emergent threat to public safety or welfare. It does not have a pre-abatement process for appeal. That's a distinction from current. but notice must be given to the responsible person as soon as reasonably possible. Ideally, that would be before the abatement is ever done, but if the person's not in the state, for instance, if it's a property owner that lives in California and we're not able to contact them, the idea here is to be able to abate the nuisance before it causes public harm. And that person, that out-of-state person, would be provided notice as soon as reasonably possible thereafter. So with that, I'm open to questions on this, and please.
Council President Honda.
Thank you. This is interesting. So how many of these situations do we have that we need to act on pretty quickly?
I'd say, and with the caveat that my experience at the city is limited to months, not years, but in the months that I've been here, I would say that there have been, in terms of chronic nuisance properties, there's been several. So I would say in the 2 to 5 range in terms of chronic nuisance properties or things that might potentially constitute chronic nuisance properties. In terms of emergency summary abatement, it doesn't come along very often, but when it does, it's in our mind extremely important to be able to deal with that right then, immediately.
So let's say there, let's take one of the properties that we've had along Dash Point and 308 or something. And it took months and months and months, if not maybe a year or more, to get that property fixed and cleaned up. And it looks really nice. The other day it looked really, actually very, very nice. So this would take that timeline and really crunch it down, and we would be able to move much faster.
So I'm not exactly sure which one of the properties, we call them by colloquial names inside the city, but I think I know one of the properties you're referring to. Is it a single-family residential
Yes.
property with trash and
And
garbage
cars,
like that?
yeah.
The answer to that would depend very much on the nature of the violation and whether it's severe and emergent threat. I don't think that property specifically, at least the one that I'm thinking of, would meet that standard, because the damage to the public, again, the damage to the public from that property, while considerable, it doesn't rise to the severe and emergent standard that I think the emergency summary abatement calls for. This is something that's more, or it's designed to deal with situations where the damage is very much instantaneous. Like I said, like a fire or something like that, where it's an instantaneous risk to public health and safety.
So in a property that has a lot of trash and vehicles all over, and let's say rats start coming into the property and travel out to the neighboring yards, is that a severe emergency that we could?
In some circumstances, I think that situation that you're describing would give rise to something that's severe and emergent enough to invoke using the emergency summary abatement. Particularly, I'm just thinking of potential factual scenarios here, but particularly if there were a tenant that were residing in the place and the junk was accumulating and there was a rat infestation as a result of the junk, and there was concrete evidence that there was some really dangerous situations going on as a result of that. That's a situation where I could see that rising to the level.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kuchma.
So I have 2 questions. May I call you Kent?
Of course.
I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. So this also applies to noise, a noise ordinance, correct? Because it says census.
Correct. And so I listed a few public nuisances, but there are other public nuisances specific, for instance, noise nuisances and things like that.
So I have 2 questions. The first one has to do with this has been a problem in the past, and it is currently, where a neighbor said that their neighboring property owner had loud music going from the afternoon well into 3 a.m., and the police didn't do anything about it. Does this help the police then to respond to that kind of a?
I don't think so, to
Okay.
be frank. I don't think this addresses that specific situation that you're talking about. Because I guess if it were a chronic repeat violation in terms of a property that had repeated noise violations, and assuming those noise violations were violations of the nuisance code, which they likely would be, if you had a repeat offender property, the chronic nuisance portion might be able to be used and be helpful for that sort of a situation. I don't think the emergency short-term.
So in that instance, a police officer, if one was available, would be able to go to the house and say, hey, keep it down, that kind of a thing. Is that correct?
I don't think that the proposed code changes would change the police's ability
Okay.
to do that. I think they're already allowed to do that under current
Sure.
code. They might just not want to for various.
Yeah, they may not have had the personnel available. So the second question is, we have it's not a property, it is persons on a regular basis on Saturday mornings. You know, and I'm all about fairness. We have told our firefighters that they cannot stand on 320th and Pack Highway and go out, you know, to fill the boot, go out into traffic to fill the boot for charity. So, but we do have individuals who are there every Saturday morning. They are not from our city, they're from Tacoma. Why they're coming to our city, I would imagine, because we don't have an ordinance against it. They have loudspeakers, they use offensive words, I mean, truly offensive. I mean, if you could hear what they were saying, but it's so loud, it's distracting, and I'm sure if you're driving by, it's distracting. But they're there 2 and 3 hours every single Saturday morning, and they do go out into traffic. I went up to them, and one individual who was going out into traffic, I said, you can't do that. And he said, why not? And I said, I'm on the council, and we have an ordinance against going out into traffic, and it's not safe. And he said, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to call the cops? And I said, no, but you can't do that. Well, he went right ahead and did it. So here's the thing, and they're doing this every Saturday. What can we do about something like that? It's not safe to traffic, it's not safe to, they're going to get killed.
Sure. There's a few layers to that, some of which I think I can explain from up here, and then I'm not sure if Brian might want, and/or EJ might want to jump in on the right-of-way and potential right-of-way permit type implications of the question. But in terms of the shouting and using megaphones and expressing themselves, my concern there from a legal perspective is that might be some form of legally protected First Amendment speech. I don't know.
But the noise level, the decibel level is way over and above. I mean, we
Sure.
have a decibel, I mean, if you're going by in a car, there's a decibel level that they're not.
Your
I mean,
windows are shaking.
Yeah. So, you know, that, whether they're speaking or using a music, it's the same noise level.
I'm happy to look into that more and report back. I think I might be able to formulate a more intelligent answer that way, but when I can look at all the potential implications.
Sure, if they want to stand there with a sign and say, you know, this is who we are, you know, and notifying people come up to them and hand the brochure, fine. But if they're going to be yelling and going out in traffic, that's something else, quite different.
Yeah, and I do, again, I'm without the code in front of me, I know that there is a right-of-way, or I think that there's some sort of a right-of-way permit that's required for some of those activities, EJ?
Sort of. So there, and I don't remember it's actually through the police department, not through Public Works, but there is an assembly permit that if you have over a certain number of people assembling for a demonstration within the right-of-way, you're required to get a demonstration permit.
I highly doubt they've got a permit. I mean, I'll ask, but.
Well, and we can certainly circle up with the police department and find out as well on
And I
that
think,
end.
You know, EJ, what bothers me so much is that the fact that I said, you shouldn't do this, and I expected them to comply. Oh, well, thank you for telling me.
Sure.
No, I mean, it's like in your face. So
Sure.
they shouldn't be, if we say to our firefighters, you can't do that, and then we allow somebody else to do it, we can't do that. We need to be fair.
Understood. So the other half of that is similar to a lot of topics. If they stay on the sidewalk and talk from there, there's provided they're not obstructing pedestrians on the sidewalk.
Yeah, that's fine.
They're right, exactly. There's very little we can do. However, if they're and it's not stepping into traffic as much as interfering with traffic. So if cars are having to swerve or stop for them, that's actually under state law where the violation comes in. And that is something that the police department does have the authority to enforce. But I'm happy to circle back with the chief and have him either reach out to you or report to the council, whatever you prefer.
I'd appreciate that. I had expected that perhaps they might comply simply to say thank, and they didn't, and that's not right.
Okay. Yeah, I will reach out to the police chief and ask him to take a look into it and circle back with you.
Appreciate it.
Can you share that information with all the council members?
I will ask the chief to, yeah.
Thank you. Well, no more questions? I will entertain the motion.
We don't have a motion.
Oh, we don't.
This doesn't need a motion?
It should be a motion to forward this to the January 6th council meeting for first reading. I believe there was an agenda bill in the packet, but if not, I apologize.
That's okay. So isn't the meeting January 4th? Is it January?
Yeah, I could be wrong about the date. Is it January 4th?
No, it's January 4th.
Okay, because that's what I've been saying all night, January 4th consent agenda, so.
So it should have been in your packet, but the motion should read, I move to forward option 1 to the January 4th, sorry, not 1st, council meeting for first reading.
To adopt the proposed ordinance.
Correct.
All right, so moved.
I'll second. All right, any other questions or discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye,
Aye.
thank you.
Matter passed 2-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are now moving on to item I, Ordinance Proposed Code 12.35 FWRC for licensing permanent supported housing and transitional housing and emergency housing and shelter. Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chair Tran, Council President Honda, and members of the council. I don't think anyone else is on the committee, but welcome, everyone. So we're, earlier this year, the council had a lengthy discussion, both at the committee and full council level, about permanent supportive housing and emergency shelter provisions in response to House Bill 1220. The council adopted the provisions with some modifications as recommended by both the Planning Commission and this committee to the council. And then when it got to the full council, the council recommended two things along with adopting the ordinance. One is that we revisit this in April, that we take a look at this again to see if there's anything else that we need to do to it, to make any changes, to evaluate how it's been going for the first 6 months. And the second item was that hopefully between that time that you took that action and April, staff could present a licensing program for permanent supportive housing and emergency shelter. That is what we're talking about tonight, is this licensing proposal. So the policy question is, should the city amend the code, specifically Title 12, to include city licensing requirements for permanent supportive housing and transitional housing and emergency housing and shelter facilities located in the city? Okay, this slide is the summary of the draft ordinance that you received in your packet. It would be an annual application, an annual license that they would submit to the city. It would identify the number of occupants in their facility, the number of rooms, and it would include an operational plan. Again, this would be something that they would do every year. The fee would be $500, although government and nonprofit facilities would be exempt from that. It would include safety provisions. It would have a written security and emergency plan for the facility. And we'll get to a little bit more to those in 4 because that's somewhat related to that. And it would work to resolve any resident felony issues with law enforcement. So then on the plan, as it relates to conduct and operation, I'll go through these really quickly, and we can discuss them in more details if you have any questions. There would be a manager and operator on premises all the time for emergency shelter facilities. There would not be any direct intake without a referral. And there was a question earlier about, well, who does the referrals? Those are by authorized agencies to provide referrals to these facilities. It wouldn't just be any agency that does not have the expertise or licensure to give referrals. So there is a system and process to receive a referral. To keep complete and accurate records, post all human and health services offered, and a schedule for those services. All the residents in the facilities would need to comply with local, state, and federal laws. No resident shall exhibit a threatening or unsafe behavior, nor can they use or sell illegal drugs in the facility. And information regarding transit shall be made available to all residents. And lighting would be required for internal common areas of emergency housing and shelter. That last item is going to be a slight change than what you have, because we wanted to make this consistent with the item that Kent just talked about for the nuisance properties, specifically for hotel properties. So what we're proposing in that ordinance is that there be, among other things, requirements for lighting to provide more eyes in the interior spaces. This makes it consistent with that for the shelter facilities. Not so much with the permanent supportive housing facilities, because that's more related to housing rather than residents of a more transient nature in the facility that shelter is. So lighting will be required in those facilities. And I believe that is it. Oh, yes, the options are to adopt the ordinance, or don't adopt it and provide additional direction to staff. The mayor's direction is to approve the ordinance. And I just want to say, I want to thank the committee and council members for their feedback throughout this process. It's been very helpful for us to, it's given us direction as we've discussed how best to present this program to the council. And again, the mayor recommends approval. Certainly not a finished product if you do adopt it now, as we're going to revisit this in April, and likely for each year as this constantly evolves. But at this time, it is recommended to move forward at this time. And that's it. I'll stop sharing and answer questions.
Thank you, Brian. Councilmember Kochma, and then Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. So thank you very much, EJ. I'm very happy to see that we're going to talk about licensing for transitional housing. So, and I'm fine with not having to exempt government and nonprofits from the $500 fee, but they will still be included. They still have to put an application in. Is that
That's
correct?
correct.
Yeah, so that will help us know how many transitional housing, supportive housing we have in our city. So are we going to go, how do we contact the houses that are already existing?
We have an idea of them already,
Okay.
so we will make contact with them to make sure that they're licensed and that they renew every year. So to answer your question, there will be some outreach to get this started for those that are existing.
That'll be helpful. And so this is going to be an ongoing process. This isn't the final be-all and all.
Yes, well, like I said, we'll revisit this in April, and
Okay.
we'll see how effective things are going, and I
Great.
suspect that we'll revisit this in the future as well,
Okay.
just to evaluate it again.
So you said there will be no use of illegal drugs. What is now considered illegal? I mean, there's personal usage and there's.
Yes. I'm not an expert on that, but the ordinance would capture anything that's not illegal. Attorney Ben Alstein, I don't know if you want to add to that, but it's written so that if whatever is illegal at the books at the time,
Sure.
they would not.
Okay,
allowed to
so, for example, if you have somebody in transitional housing or in a halfway house, usually, for example, for alcohol or drug use, and usually the residents will monitor the individual usage, and if there is something that is not within the rules of the house, then they're asked to leave. Is that going to be something that's going to be incorporated in this kind of a program?
Yeah, I think you're referencing to internal controls, like
Because
a
those
lot
are the
of.
best.
Yeah, so they're there to recover or transition out of a substance abuse, and if there is any
Right.
kind of
Right.
relapse, then they need
Right.
to either have a discussion or they leave the facility altogether,
Right.
depending on the internal controls. This deals specifically with illegal use, so you know, if it's a a facility that says, you know, recovering from alcohol, for example, alcohol is not illegal, so this ordinance would not cover that. But certainly any other illegal drugs, this would say okay.
So how do we encourage these houses, you know, because marijuana is not illegal, you know, personal use is not illegal. I mean, how do we encourage these houses to, you know, be actually supportive? So they're supporting the individual, you know, we can't make them treatment beds, but so they're supporting the individual to become free and clear. How do we do that?
Yeah, and that's probably an operational question that would be good to evaluate as we relook at things ongoing. I think right now what we're trying to capture, propose, at least we could start with illegal drugs. If we wanted to add any others to the list, we could certainly look at the legality of doing that for future times. But right now we're just making it consistent with what is illegal.
So this is my last question. This is going to cover the extended stay, correct?
Yes.
And Red Lion?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. I have a few questions. First off, with that, it has, you say that sale and use of illegal drugs. What about possession? It seems like to be possession, sale, or use of illegal drugs, rather than simply sale or use. Why is possession not included?
Yeah, I'm
in
gonna
there?
defer to Kent on that.
I think we can include that.
Okay, because that seems like it'd be very critical to include possession.
And
in that.
I don't see any legal reason why we couldn't include that.
Okay. Next, who will be responsible to make sure that they are complying with that, with all of the different provisions?
Right, so when they submit the plan, the city will review that, and if we get any calls that indicate that there's been a violation, we're not going to, I guess to answer your question, we will not have city emergency shelter police or anything like that at this point, unless there is a specific call that something is happening, at which point we will review what's going on, and if there is any violation of the operating plan, that would then affect their license and their ability to operate as a whole.
Okay, and so the determining, if they are in violation, would the police be going out, code compliance? I mean, what is
Yeah,
the
it's-
mechanism for enforcing compliance?
Yes, great question, as one as we're still evaluating. But yes, we're probably not going to send city staff without a police presence, so the police will be a part of it. And as to which division will handle that, it likely will be a combination of code enforcement and additional executive staff from the city, just because it's a new program, we want to see what's exactly going on.
Okay.
Brian, if I might also just jump in it quickly there. So similar to my previous presentation, code enforcement would be able to enforce violations of this licensing program, just like any other violation in code, which means the notice of violation process that I described earlier, the order to correct, the abatement if necessary, if not complied with. All those civil mechanisms are available for this code.
Okay, very well. Next, there's the 1.3 mile distance between the facilities. And as I'm reading this, it's, depending on the zoning, if it states if it's, let's see here, trying to find it here. Let's see, that was minimum lot size. Here is, anyway, it talks about the number of people in each facility, and the way it refers to it is if there's either 2 or 3 or more, then there'll be 3 or more, I think it is. It'll be the 1.3 mile distance between them, If there's two, if it's a facility for two, I mean, does that mean that there could be 3 houses in a row, each with 2 of these residents in it? I mean, why is it 1.3 miles only if it meets a certain threshold of the number of residents?
Yeah, it's how we determine what would be a rise to the level of separation and 2 people. But I believe the zoning is units, not people. The license captures the number of people, and the zoning captures the number of units.
Yeah, I think so, the number of units. But so, I mean, it could be, so there could be 2 units, 2 units, 2 units,
Right, so.
all in a row.
Yeah, there's also a question, well, not a question, but from the legislature, it said that we specifically could not create local ordinances that effectively negates any shelter at all. So if we're, or housing, and so if we're being as specific as, separating 2 units from 2 units, then, at that point, we're not gonna have hardly any in the city. And so that's why that threshold is a little bit higher, so that we can meet the number that we're projecting to have in the city. If the density is not such that we can find space for those, for that need, then, the county may come back and say, you're not meeting this, so you need to fix your ordinance. So we don't want to have that conversation.
Brian, if I could also, sorry, just to jump in a little bit on this one, and I'd also defer to Sarah, who's in the audience, on what I'm about to say, because it deals more with a programmatic reason for that, for the number, for the, and specifically I'm talking about the number of units that triggers the separation requirement. The reason it was kept where 2 or fewer units did not trigger the separation is because many of the service providers have situations where they have a single unit or a single room in an otherwise non-permanent supportive housing structure. And we did not intend or did not want to make it so that those onesie twosies, in other words, 1 unit here, 1 unit there, triggered a separation requirement.
Okay.
Sarah, thank you.
If I may just add, I would actually clarify, not many service providers. There are actually very few who will do a single-family type service, Fusion being one of them, with their transitional housing. They do have, I don't know the specifics, but multiple condo units, for instance, 2 or 3 in one complex. It's actually very few service providers who will have scattered site like that, but there are some like Fusion.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And also, I see that there's different distance requirements between the emergency housing and the permanent supportive housing. That's different distance requirements there.
That's correct.
Okay, and the reason for that?
So the shelters tend to be not in single-family residential. They seem to be more units as well per facility. So the perceived impact is greater than the permanent supportive housing units, which can, as we talked about before, could be in theory as low as 2 units, and so the impact is less. And so to the point about being able to accommodate the projection that we have, the separation of 2 units from 2 units would effectively zone out permanent supportive housing.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I had one more question. However, I think that your answers to the other ones answered my last question, so thank you.
Council President.
Thank you. Will Fusion Family Shelter need to get a license?
They will.
And will their condos and their single-family homes need to get a license?
Yes.
So the question came up of who does a referral. And I don't think we had a real answer to that. Would that be a physician, a staff member here at the city?
Yeah, I'm going to let Sarah take this one.
It's good to see you, Sarah, in person.
In terms of referrals, there are existing mechanisms in place for referrals that agencies use. Sometimes that looks a little bit different. A lot of our agencies will use what's called coordinated entry for all. There's a family shelter call-in line for Fusion's family shelter, but a lot of those longer-term services will use coordinated entry. The day center may refer people, other providers. We at the city can also refer. Usually we're still sending people in for an assessment, and the providers for assessments, they can have that done at the day center. Multi-service center is a regional access point. But in and of itself, a referral could come from multiple sources. We won't necessarily authorize all of those. I would think we can talk about more of that if we impede service too much, it means that our residents also aren't able to access. They can't hold beds for very long, and if they had a bed opening, they're going to have to use those processes to fill it. And most providers, like I said, I just clarified, most providers will be obligated to use coordinated entry for all, or that family shelter call-in. There are mechanisms in place again.
Okay. It talks about a security plan for, so this is 98 pages long, so that the public understands, this is a very long ordinance here. And each and every zone talks about pretty much the same things that are required. But, so the security plan, will our police department need to okay the security and emergency plan?
They will more than likely be a part of the review. Yes.
And also the fire department, I imagine?
They will, we could include them. I mean, they would normally be, review the, the ingress and egress of the building rather than what we're talking about.
Okay.
But we could include those, South King Fire as well.
Each of these talks about keeping a log with the information that the log would hold. Who will have access to that log, and how can we keep that information private, because it shouldn't be made public?
All of the providers for homeless services that we're talking about, at least right now, and even those that aren't will have a different mechanism. But most of our providers use a system that's called the Homeless Management Information System. We actually will not have access to that. It's protected data. For the city to have access, we'd have to have releases with each of the individuals. We would need staffing to do that, but there is a system in place where they have access. We can call up and have conversations, and there are mechanisms to do that with the providers. There's some smaller providers that maybe don't. We talked about Oxford House earlier today. They have other systems in place for tracking data. But most of our providers, Fusion, any provider with King County, CCS, they're going to be in the Homeless Management Information System.
Okay, so if someone comes to the counter over in your department and they want to create a transitional housing or shelter or whatever, so from there, it gets built, then does it go to you, Sarah, that you make sure that a provider is hired, or the provider has the education that we require and the knowledge to run the facility? Does that go to you, and does the city oversee that?
I think that is part of what we're going to be having to work out the details on who's reviewing what component. The city is not a funder of most of these services. We're not the expert in providing them. We can do some level of review and talk through that, and we would have that ability. But there's some details there that we can do that initial review across our divisions, as Brian indicated, and I would imagine that community services would be a part of that.
So then I would go to staffing, because obviously your department isn't staffed well enough to do this. So how is that going to work? Have you asked the mayor for additional staffing?
My initial look at this is that it's not going to be that much. We do have a fairly good idea of what's in the city. And there, you know, the annual licenses might take some time, but I don't think it's going to be to the point that we're going to be overwhelmed with a need for additional staffing to do this. It's going to create definitely some time to do this, but there's the number that we have in the city, to me, doesn't at this point in our where we're at in this program necessitate additional staffing. It'll be a burden, but not something that we can overcome.
Okay, I'd like to keep track of that because Sarah does a lot of work and her division of your department there's 2 people, right?
In her division, yes.
Yeah, and they do a
2.5.
lot of work.
2.5.
I'm a little concerned that if this falls on her shoulders, or whoever would be there, that it might just be so much that other things aren't getting done. So
Understood.
I'd like to be, that's monitored, and if more staffing is needed, please let the council know, because we'll get you more staffing. I don't want this to overburden and impact what we're already doing in human services.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Assefa Dawson?
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you go back a couple of slides? I think it's the one you just clicked on. Under conduct operation. Hold on. Okay, I'll have to ask you later. I forgot what it was, but it was number 4 where I had a question. It's the bullet before the very last bullet. Information regarding transit shall be made available to our residents. Are we talking about Metro and Sound Transit having the schedules in the common areas? Okay, all right.
And any other, there may be some other transit opportunities that are beyond that. We would.
Okay, but would they also be given worker cards or something like that, along with?
Possibly, I don't know if it's something that we could require at this time, but we could encourage that be provided.
It would be great, because that is, a lot of people do need mode of transportation, and they either don't have change on them, or, Orca card is much more better and easier to access if available. Through the Human Services funds, the King County Human Services, maybe?
And if I may just add that many of our providers already do prioritize some level of transportation. So if residents don't have access, they would then, work with them. There are some limitations. The reduced fare, bus passes, and our minimal Orca cards can be a little bit more expensive, but a lot of services build that into their budget. One thing that we might be able to do, even though we may not mandate that they provide bus access, is we can work with them maybe in their operation. We can talk and see if it's easy enough to add that as a question, whether or not they're providing it or what kind of focus they have.
Thank you, that would be great. Thank you.
Councilmember Kochmar and then Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, Chair Tran. And thank you, Jay. We want these people to be successful, the people that are going into our transitional housing. We want them to be successful. The ordinance describes a code of conduct that includes, on-site unsafe behavior, as well as sale and use of illegal drugs. So let's say I'm a drug dealer, and I know that this extended stay or a house in a neighborhood has a number of people in the units that can use a certain portion of legal drugs, because a certain portion is legal to have in your possession. So I'm going to come to the parking lot or the area nearby, and I'm going to sell to them. But then I'm going to have and I understand that this may be happening, we're going to have a gang war where who's going to be the person who's going to get to do the sale of the drugs. So then we've got a gang war going on where people are getting shot, not on premise, but in the parking lot or in the business next door or in the neighborhood. How do we control the safety outside of the property, but proximity to the property? I mean, I am wondering, you know, we have some motels on Pack Highway where people have been shot outside the area.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Coachmore. I think this in combination with the previous agenda item that you discussed would help with that. It doesn't specifically address you know, the drug activity, but I think it works from the foundation of where that activity might be built from. And if there's, you know, the previous agenda item talked about facilities that don't meet certain level of city expectation when it comes to running things and making things less conducive to crime, in conjunction with this one that we've tried to model it to be consistent with at least for the hotel side of things with emergency shelter.
So the emphasis on the police is going to be a
that's the other
important-
side is the enforcement action. I think with this the Kent's item and then this item, it's more of the building from the ground up before we get to the enforcement piece.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
On page 96, it points out that a manager or operators representatives have a manager or operators representative on the premise at all times, except in suburban estates or single-family residential zones. Why is there that exception in those two zones?
A couple reasons. One is that suburban estates is a zone that I think it's like a 5-acre minimum zone, and so the units that are going to be built there are fairly low density. In addition to that, this is permanent supportive housing that we're talking about, and so it becomes it becomes a money issue. You know, it's cost prohibitive for a provider to have someone on, in the most extreme example, a 2-unit facility where there's a manager at each one. When in many cases it's, you know, for example, we talked about the Oxford House. There's not specifically a manager, but there's usually like a head resident of some kind, and so and then Fusion, if they were to have to provide a manager for every one of their facilities, they'd not be able to provide the service to begin with.
Wouldn't it make more sense then, instead of having it per the zoning, have it per the occupancy, or for the units?
Yeah, and they're somewhat related, in that once it gets above a certain level, then it's not allowed in single-family zones. So that might be what you're. I think it's tied closely to what you're suggesting.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Council President Honda?
Thank you. So I'm trying to figure out how I can word this without sounding like I'm not a nice person. So if, let's say the extended stay, let's just take that. I realize it's people's homes, and I realize that the intent is to house people there who are chronically homeless, who will, this will be their home because they can't qualify for anything else to be in. What would happen if there were a number of calls for the police to come because there were issues that the police needed to handle? At what point would, because we wouldn't want to kick someone who's medically fragile, who is finally under a roof and has a bathroom and a bed to sleep on, out if they're having a mental issue and they're not getting the kind of help that they need, and police have to come. How is that going to be dealt with?
So I'll give an answer, and then Sarah, if you want to give one as well. So one of the things that we're looking at right now, so we just finished talking about the hotel, the transitional housing type facilities having a level of nuisance expectations or lack of nuisance, hopefully on the premises. And then in cases in which they do exceed that nuisance threshold, then action can be taken. There is discussion right now about looking, expanding that to go beyond just transitional, emergency shelter type situations, including hotels, to other types of housing. We couldn't specifically pinpoint this type of housing without looking at all apartments. And so that may be something as we look, to broaden the scope of that to include permanent supportive housing in that discussion. But it would need to be, just to be on the safe side, would need to be all types of multifamily housing, not just specifically this one, if we do something that broadens what we just talked about. Do you want to take a? Yeah.
And I would just add that that the operations plans and the safety plans that agencies have in place are designed to respond to people. As you're referencing, Council President Honda, there will be situations where behaviors exist. Staff are trained in de-escalation, in seeing those and being able to address it. What we're looking for in an operation plan and a safety plan is not that there is never an issue, but they have a plan in place in the staffing that can address that issue and hopefully prevent it from happening, prevent it from becoming that community issue, from becoming more prevalent on site, that it's addressed in the moment and it's an adequate addressing of an issue. If that's them calling police, if it gets to a point where somebody is no longer welcome, that's part of their planning. But it is hopefully not, and I would recommend at least consideration that it not be intended to shut down facilities, that you're not having a licensing program that's intended to shut them down. It's at least not to start, that we're here as a good partner and a collaborator and to look for solutions to make sure that our residents are successful. If that.
So I know King County Executive Constantine has mentioned that cities will have a say in who the provider is and write the code of conduct and things that are expected. Is that true? Because have they contacted the City of Federal Way to start that process?
Yes, and actually I have not yet been able to reach out to them there. I got a copy of a potential RFP, or I don't know what term they use for the solicitation, but the King County already has a pool of eligible providers, and they will release a bid process for each site, including Federal Way. And we will be part of that. It will probably be at a staff level, but we will reach out. I'll talk to their referral and then council in some way, just looking at the RFP and going through that. They've sent over a draft agreement. It's their good neighbor agreement as well, so we can look at those and have some say.
When do we expect the extended stay to be housing people for which it was intended for which it was purchased for?
I do not have that direct answer. I believe that there was an update provided today about the Afghan refugees, but I believe it's probably springtime.
Okay.
We can get more information for you on that.
So when the Afghan refugees leave at the end of December, if that still is happening, and I didn't see the update if it came to council.
March.
They're staying till March?
Yep. And there may be then some transition at the site. So one of King County's priorities is making sure that the sites are built out to the extent that they can be for their purpose. So they will want some transition time to do any changes to the property that they need to make it the most effective for permanent supportive housing.
Okay, thank you.
And providers, if I can just add one more piece, providers will take some amount of time to staff up, to hire new staff, train them. This isn't something that, even if they awarded a contract, that somebody could turn around and start this, in a couple weeks. We want them to take the time and make sure that they're doing this in a way that will be the most successful. That will include tailoring operations plans, safety plans, that will be at the provider level.
So Sarah, are there enough providers in the Pacific Northwest for all the places that might need a trained and competent provider to be able to run these places?
And I do believe we have the capacity for health through housing and probably some of the other services that may be coming on board regionally. Yes, our providers are saying that they would have the capacity, and we'll continue to watch that. We do know that just in general, in response to COVID, we're seeing a lot of our providers hit kind of maximums, but some of those are temporary positions. With these being a permanent health through housing is well funded, I wouldn't see the same issue there. They had adequate interest to be in that provider pool, and they are talking about how they may be able to expand that in the future to add new programs or new providers and partner them with well-established to build that capacity.
Okay, thank you.
To make the motion.
All right. I move to forward the proposed ordinance to first reading on January 4th, 2022.
I'll second that. Any other discussion, questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Oh,
Aye. This matter passed 2-0. And that is all items, actionable item that committee has to do today. Our next meeting is going to be on February 7th at 5 p.m. Here at the City Hall. I want to take this opportunity to thank Council President Honda and all the council members here. And thank you, staff, and thank you, member of the public, for being here today. Have a good week.
thank you for your comments, and welcome, Councilmember. I was going to say Councilmember Jack, but Halt.
Just say yes, you're good.
All right, thank you.
Call me anything but late for dinner.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Or ice cream.